Hello again, everyone. We're going to start off today by talking about some of the tools that we're going to need to work on our next project, which is based on watercolor. This is, I would say, of course, as with every other tool that we use in our kit for perspective drawing and architectural drawing. We're going to start off with pencil. So as usual, that you've already been using, and we're going to work through the same steps as we have been before with construction lines. So I'm just going to go through all the tools that you're going to need before you get too far into this. So I have some miniature pencils. I just use them up until a certain length and then I throw them out. So I have a number here of different hardnesses and length. So this is pretty much as small as I go with a pencil before throwing it out, which is basically the length of my index finger. And then I I have a harder pencil. I've been using that. So these will be, we're going to work on a drawing, then going in with watercolor. You can use pencil, I mentioned in class. It won't, or at least it shouldn't. If you have a very, very soft graphite, it might bleed a little bit. So it's maybe good to test some of the pencils that you're using. Ink is another one that you can use. Sometimes I've actually gone over ink after the watercolor is applied in order to make sure that it doesn't bleed, so your painting can be dry. Then you can go over it with ink to enforce some of those line weights after the fact. The type of watercolor cakes that I use is this 12 pack. This is, you can see it's worn and used. I should be cleaning it up a bit, but this is Winsor & Newton. Very inexpensive, $5 or $6, I think, or certainly less than 10 when I bought it. It's been worn out quite a bit, and I just need to take a wet rag or wet paper towel to clean this a little bit better before I begin. And then I use this Faber-Castell brush. You can see the tip, and again, it's been worn quite a bit. I bought it as a kind of interesting experiment. This is the type that you can fill with water, and then you push this button, and water is supposed to come down to the tip of the brush. So you don't have to continuously go back to the cup of water, which, quite honestly, it doesn't work as well as I would like. It's hard to fill with water, and then you really have to keep pushing these buttons so many times that it's just easier to keep dipping in water. I mean, even when I'm on site and I'm in the city, I bring a jar of water. It's just easier than having to deal with this. And you can see how small this is. It doesn't even hold that much water anyway. So I just bring a cup. And so make sure that when you start, you have a cup, even if you have this type of brush that is supposed to hold water, it really isn't going to do the job unless you have a teeny tiny little piece of paper and you're not really doing much painting at all. And that brings me again to the paper itself. I'm using Strathmore watercolor paper. This is 11 by 15. You can use another size. We're not going to be using watercolor that much this semester, but I think it's worth having a pad of watercolor paper. You might even be able to buy just a few sheets in order to get through these exercises. We're going to do 2, but there are only 12 sheets in this whole thing. So watercolor is a kind of fun thing to experiment with. And it is, of course, important to have watercolor paper, not the type of paper that you had been using up until this point, because it will go in places you don't want it to be. And then I have paper towel here, which is useful for cleaning your brush between different paint colors, as well as cleaning your palette. So you can probably see from the use of this, I have 3 different shades, and I continuously am adding water to these and taking water out, trying to wipe them clean as best you can after each use. But sometimes I'm in a hurry and I'm just, even if some, green gets into black or green gets into blue, that color change isn't really going to hurt too much. So those are the primary tools. It's good to have them all ahead of time so that you're not running away from your desk back and forth trying to find things. And so again, we're going to start off with pencil. We're going to use a reference image. You probably have this in front of you by the time I post this, but we're going to be drawing and painting the river cottages by Harry Weese. This was built in 1990 along the banks of the river in Chicago at the Kinsey Street Bridge. I was searching for a while on some quality images of this building. I'm always trying to find the most dramatic. I've already drawn a few times from the bridge, and I was trying to get a view of the building on this orientation from the south so that it's more dramatic. I'm always trying to find the most dramatic view of these things because those are, of course, the most interesting. And the first thing to note here on this image is I'm obviously in the river on a boat. The river itself looks very, very muddy. The bridge, you might not be able to make it out, but it's red. We have green trees, so this is a summer scene, although it looks like there are also two trees here on the shore between the river and the edge of the river cottages that look dead. So this is another great example of you can either eliminate those and not draw them at all, or you could draw them in maybe like a winter scene where you just show the branches and the trunk, or you could actually bring them back to life and add that green tone. So treating them as you see from these others. So we have a kind of muddy river, a red bridge, green in the trees and landscape, and then of course the blue for the sky. The building itself is a range of grays and whites. There is another building just off to the south of this or to the left, which is casting a heavy shadow on the top of this. This is not a professional image. This is from Google Street View. You can put a person in the water on a boat and go up and down the river. So this is just happens to be the way that the view was taken at that time. The lighting is certainly not professionally ideal. The way that the shadow is being cast upon the building from the neighboring tower is very dark, and I will not render it that way. I would rather create this whole wedge of the side of the building to the south as a certain tone, one tone, rather than have it cut in half and then another line coming diagonally across the building. You can draw it or paint it or shade it in whatever way you please. I just think that this is such a strong shadow. I could do this, but it ends up being a little bit distracting because you kind of wonder, why is this like this? It becomes such a focal point. As I'm looking at screen, it almost looks like black. It's so dark, and this is bright white. So your eye is really looking at this relationship right when you see this image. So just something to take into account. Sometimes, like with the trees, you can make those changes, and that's part of the great things that you can do with drawing and architectural sketching. So as we get started here, we're going to start off again with our horizon line, which is relatively low to the page. And now as I'm in this scene, you can see then my horizon line would be right about here. So that is the cue that tells me that everything above this line is vanishing down from a point that is closest to me. In this case, this corner of the building is the closest point to the photographer or whoever took the image. And then anything beneath this line is vanishing up towards the horizon line in the distance. So this is an important point in the building as well as this diagonal, because those are the leading edges, the ones that will be kind of setting the scale for the rest of the drawing. And so I'm going to push the image off screen a little bit so that you can get a full image of what it is that I'll be drawing. And as I come across, so this is again a sketch, not meant to take much time. I find myself going much slower as I do these tutorials just because I'm trying to explain all of the pieces as I go. And so because I want this to be more about the watercolor, I'm going to go a little bit faster than I normally do. So I'll try to talk my way through it. The first thing I want to, of course, I have the horizon line already set out for me. And then as just a reference, I'm going to kind of show the edge of the water, where the water hits that kind of seawall. And then I'm going to also, just by looking at proportions, try to understand how, as this horizon line is straight across. There's this Kedzie Avenue Bridge, which will be coming up off the side of the page like this. And this is a truss. And so again, these are just simple construction lines. I'm not adding a lot to this. I'll go over this again with more final lines, as I always do, but even no matter what my media is, I'm always starting off with the same idea. All right, so I've developed this, the horizon line, which now I look might be a little high, but that's okay. I'm going to come over here now, and I'm going to start again with that leading edge, that really important piece that's coming down on an angle, because that's going to set the furthest construction of this building to the left. And this building is broken up to a series of bays. So I'm going to come down slightly, rising furthest to the upper left, and then we're going to fall down to the right as the perspective takes us away from the image, from the point of the person taking the photo. And so if you just break this down into simple forms, there are two bays on the end. So it's probably two different, this is actually a pretty wild building if you ever are able to take a tour of it or just find photos of it. Built in 1990, it's very bright on the inside, and I don't know if that's Harry Weese's original design or if that's just the effects of the late 80s and early 90s still in full gear where everything is kind of geometric shapes and very bright. But yeah, it's a very strange building from the inside. All right, so because there's so much foreground noise, there's trees that are seemingly dead, you can't really make out too much of what's going on. So in some ways, you become the designer. You can make it your own. I will not. I mean, there's reasonable assumptions that you can make in order to make this building appear as though it should. But you're not going to be able to, unless you do some real research and you come across something that gives you more information. You might not want to do that, which is fine. This building also has a spiral stair. From this perspective, it's going to look relatively flat. We're looking at it kind of in elevation. And so it comes down here. There is a balcony and a railing, another one over here. And again, I'm just masking these things out. This is the seawall. And there's also some stuff. I don't know exactly what this is. This looks kind of like something temporary. Maybe this is like a pontoon boat or something that's anchored here. I'm not going to draw that because I, first of all, don't know what it is. And second of all, it does not help the composition. So the one thing I do want to show, though, are these piers in the water, which look as though they're kind of like a remnant of a previous bridge. I know that there is a Northwestern rail bridge that comes down, and you can see part of that in the embankment on the side here. It is a defunct rail bridge. And so this is probably a protection against anything coming up into contact with that when it's down. And there may have even been other docks or piers at the side of the river here. This seawall looks to be much more modern from this, but I'm going to show this as a kind of historical artifact in the water. And so when I get to that, that's really going to be over here. And really just a series of logs that are within the river. And then they all just kind of chopped off at the top. And then one that's in much kind of less solid form, you can see here, also in the river near the foreground. So that's going to want to come down a little bit so that it's not right up against some of these other side elements defining the river's edge. It's kind of a jumble of not very clear end to the river here. It's not nice and simple. It looks like it's kind of been pieced together over time. So these are things that we can just kind of guess at. It's not really that important to the composition. So this is where I'm removing part of that, whatever it appears to be some kind of object within the river. I don't want to see that. I don't want to distract from the rest of the image. So I'm just going to assume the seawall continues behind it. And then there's a concrete lower section to the bridge and the depth of the bridge. So this is, now we're getting into this, not easy to make out what's going on there. So in a way, bringing back to life that tree might actually help us, because if we were to draw this and show a tree, you don't really have to make up much of what's going on behind. Sometimes when you're sketching, you're not situated in a place with ideal conditions, so it's sometimes good to be able to make stuff up believably, because it's actually quite rare that you have the perfect setting for something. So now we're just going to break this up into equal segments. The building itself has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels, and each time as you make your way up, each level is further away from the point of the photo. So each time they move away from you, they're kind of compressing towards one another. So the lines will kind of feel like they're growing smaller and smaller as you get to the top. All right, then the very unusual thing about this building is diagonal pieces, kind of between the angle of the building itself, and then on top of that, all these kind of diamond shapes are really what make this building unique. Some of them are set back as balconies, others are just windows. Up at the top, there's another balcony which has 2 struts that I guess complete the structural frame of the building. And then on the side, there's a series of, at each one of these levels, kind of these portals. And then in the shadows, it's a little difficult to see, but it appears as though there are some vertical openings, like 1 at each floor, and then 2 at the bottom, set back. There's another tower on the edge here. I don't want to draw it because there's nothing special about it. Again, doesn't help the composition. I can add that rail line bridge that has some structure to it. I'm going to come back in a moment and finish up some of this line work. But just to get things started, I'm going to keep moving ahead. Now, this side of the building is stepped up. There appears to be a kind of, again, there's a tree here in the foreground that extent will reach just about to the edge of that circular spiral stair. Okay, so then it looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4 diamonds on here, and one of them, and then another partial one. So it tells me that this face is pushed back from that. I can only assume that this diamond is at least half or completing itself on the other side. So when I come to the point where I'm looking at line weights, this one I probably want to create a little bit darker than it is shown in the photograph. So I want to show one edge close to that, and then break this up into 4 equal segments. 1, 2, 3, 4. So whenever I'm breaking things up into segments, so for instance, there are 4 here, that would be, I subdivide this in half, and then a half again. That is an easy way to kind of give me an idea of 4 equal segments. It's better than saying I'm going to do 4 or 8 or whatever and start just going 1, 2, 3, because at the end, even if it's more than 4, you'll end up with probably some odd fraction of a unit at the end there. So I'll bisect this, and then I can start to create those diamonds. Interestingly here, it doesn't go all the way to the bottom, but this one does. And this one has a stair that goes up through it. So you get this kind of strange resolution of all of these things. It's almost like each one of them has its own character to it. So this is going to have a stair. This building was built in 1990 at a time when the river wasn't exactly the kind of place many people were looking to live at. So there's a vertical encoder here. Okay, I found something. This is probably a good learning experience here because I found now that there is a disconnect in my proportions. I can see from the photo there looks to be a kind of gate here, which would come based on the proportions of it. I drew it too short, so I want to pull that up. And I think I pushed it out too far. So I'm going to go back, and of course, there's no shame in doing this. Always, that's why I'm telling everyone to work with those construction lines. Don't go too far because you could end up having to undo things. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to make that bridge taller because if I take this top of the bridge and come across, I'm coming all just about to the point where that diamond comes together, and that's way up here. So you can see I drew it initially much lower than I ended up drawing it. So I am also seeing now that I want to lift it up altogether because again, I can see that the relationship from the road to this eave is not nearly as big as the way I drew it. So then the bridge will become much larger in my drawing. This is a railing. And then in the distance, you can actually see, you don't have to get into this level, but there is another bridge in the distance, which has its own series of red structural elements. It's quite a bit lower, but don't have to spend too much time looking at that. Now, there's also some, really quickly, you can just allude to the fact that there is some trees back here that'll give you a little bit of pop of color. Now, again, there's another tower. This one, you can choose to draw that or not. I will add it only because I can make it look as though it's kind of ghosted in. Again, do not spend much time drawing these type of things. It's not meant to be any more than a kind of context that can give a little bit of life to a drawing. But I like to show this kind of building more than this because of this one, it's completing itself. I can see the top of it. It's much smaller in relation to the building. This one looks like it's towering above the building, and I don't even see the edge or the top of it. So I just don't want to draw that because this one I could even take out as well, because you could see that depending on how I render it, it could become an object that draws too much attention to itself, or just something that's kind of grayed out in the background. So I'm going to just draw it in. It's really up to you if you want to keep it. Beautiful satellite dish at the top. And then again, the completion of what looks to be kind of balcony somehow open to the sky here. Okay, now I'm going to work a little bit on the fenestration, which is a unique element in this building because there's a series of railings and different geometries for the glass, some of which follows that arc or the angle of the roof, and others which are just truly vertical. So here, for instance, looks like a balcony. how that meets the sky. I kind of initially drew it very simplistically, but it actually comes up. These wings kind of extend past the top. And then probably at the top of this. Okay, so I think I'm at a pretty good spot now. I think I've got quite a bit of context, and I think I'm ready to go back and start adding more of those final line weights that I want to keep in the final drawing before I start working with color. So you'll all have your own way of representing things. And so I'm going to just quick now go back and start finalizing these lines. I'm working with an extremely soft pencil here, so maybe that gives me a lot of contrast in my line work. And in fact, you can probably see the difference here. I won't be able to achieve that with this pencil. So if I'm pushing just as hard, you can see the difference between this line and that line. Maybe not so well on the screen, but all right. It should also be worth noting that when you get into color, to adding that color from your paintbrush, it will go on very fast. Unlike colored pencil, uh, you can move that paint around, you can change it, update it. If you don't like it, you can take it back. It's not exactly an eraser, but you can soak up some of that extra paint very, very quickly. As long as it hasn't dried, and even sometimes if it has recently dried, you can still go back and pick some of that pigment out of the page. I'm gonna go quick here now. I'm just drawing some things, and I gotta keep sharpening my pencil because I have such a soft grasp. In my review of student work recently, I have been awarding points to those, even if perspective isn't quite right, just giving it the time it deserves. Some people it might come naturally to people to kind of figure out perspective quick, but if you don't put in the time, and I can see that there's not been a lot of effort, I I might take a few points away. Just keep in mind that there is a lot of work that goes into a quality drawing. It's not something that can be rushed really and expect success. So it's kind of like respecting the amount of work that goes into these projects. Some people have asked me a little bit more about trees and trying to stay away from those just oh, kind of scribble trees, they call them, and people that kind of just throw stuff in there and hope for the best. Always think about that profile edge. You can see trees, all they have a certain shape to them, a kind of simple shape, but the way that branches and leaves move around that shape is seemingly random. So just think about the profile is much more important than what's happening on the inside. Sometimes you might just do an outline, and that's really much better than going in and start filling in all the little bits that you were just trying to guess at. Sometimes I'll add a little bit, even if I don't see it much. I feel like I can see some corrugation to these metal panels, and so just go in and add a little bit of texture to those. So you keep in mind that because the building can become kind of a little puzzle, trying to keep straight what's glass and what's solid at this stage can be difficult. Building has a lot of surprises to it. It's certainly not the kind of building you're used to seeing. So here again, this is the tree that you could either try to include or get rid of, or you could have it a winter scene, or just decide I'm going to put those, I'm going to draw it just as it is. I'm going to make those sticks so you can see totally through it. Or you could actually do this. It's a kind of a tree that you can see through to a degree. You can see that there is something behind it, but maybe it's not quite as defined as the rest of it. And then here's that spiral stair, which is really just a series of small tick marks that kind of weave their way around a central axis. And then this lower, there's a balcony edge here, a series of probably a sliding glass door and side lights. Sometimes it's difficult to see, but I believe that there are balcony railings here, of course, that are very small and hard to see, but I'm going to put them in. So again, this will be the solid, just so in a way that I'm doing this not only to tell myself that yes, that is solid, but it also helps to give it a little bit of definition materiality wise. Stack exhaust fans. I'm kind of moving from left to right. I'm right-handed, so if I started with my graphite, and I'm already, you can already probably see some of your graphite coming off in your hand, especially if you're using a soft graphite as I am. I want to move from left to right so that I'm not running my hand over that graphite as I go. Okay, so we're about halfway done with the building thus far. I've got that first two bays 1, 2, and now I'm going to move on to the lowered section to the right. Which is difficult to make out. Again, I can bring back to life that tree if I'm not really confident. I don't really want to make things up. If you look at the photo, or maybe you could even do some more digging and find some other imagery of the building and make a better guess there. Even when you're on site sketching, sometimes something could be obstructed. You don't know exactly what is going on behind it, so you have to just either make it up or do your best. Sketching is all about the idea of the building and not total accuracy. Sometimes you don't want to go too far, of course, then you're kind of losing the whole idea of the building. But I think for us in this, the little pieces here and there, you could probably make your own and nobody would be calling you out on that. So here again, I'm making those diamonds a little bit more intentional. This stair, very odd. The building certainly has a lot of character to it. There's going to be a shadow here. This is a recess. This is kind of like a pass through within the building. So that one is going to be dark, in shade and shadow. And here I'm going to make some assumptions what's going on. That tree is going to help me to kind of shield some of that I cannot make out. And it looks like there's a vertical element here that might be containing some kind of shaft or a elevator. Okay, so now I'm in a space where I have most of the building the way I want it. This is going to be where I can leave things, continue to move now towards this older steel bridge. I don't really have to add much more detail to this, maybe just a few tick marks to indicate some balconies. It's going to be very abstract. Don't want to draw too much attention to it, but just enough to show it's a multi-story building in the distance. Okay, then the bridge, when I come back and start coloring this, I want to be able to throw some red on this. But it's not as it's far enough away that I can't really just stay within the lines like a coloring book. And that's probably one of the big takeaways here is doing watercolor is not supposed to be about coloring lines, like inside the lines. It's more about fields of color that and I use line work as a guide. Sometimes if you become a real expert at watercolor, you can actually paint without using lines at all. I am not a watercolor expert. I just have used it enough that I feel like I have an effective way of illustrating it. Okay, so now, again, the bridge is more for context. It's not like I'm going to come back and count how many girders there are and how many different steel beams. I just want to draw enough so that when someone looks at this drawing, they recognize what this is. These are the small pickets of the bridge. I could just go over this all with red. I don't need to kind of be so specific as to what's what. Okay, so I think that I can start now. Just I'm going to add just a little bit of reflectivity to some of the stuff in the foreground, and really just to show that how. And you can do this with pencil. You can go over this again with ink. You could do this only with watercolor, but you can utilize the texture of the paper to help you here. Watercolor paper typically isn't very smooth. It kind of absorbs the water through some of the, it's called tooth, the kind of texture of the paper is rough. It's not totally even and smooth. Like, bond paper is very smooth and it would not absorb any of that water at all, which is the reason why it would warp. But here I can just show a little bit. I could always come back and do this later. So I think this is kind of where we would start adding color now. So once you have this level of drawing, you're going to want to, with your watercolors, of course. And now I'm kind of zoomed in here, so I'm going to have to move my palette back and forth to show you how I'm mixing things. Hopefully I won't get too much on the page that I'm not intended to. So I found more success. This is going to be like a sketching version of looking at how to watercolor something, but it's better to think big fields of color, and then move into smaller areas. So you don't want to just come into a small area and just start filling in like a coloring book. It's kind of like the idea of a wash, which is kind of coming across in large areas, creating fields of color. So I'm just getting my brush wet and then going across the background. I try to use the big fields of color first, and that's going to be, for instance, the sky. Come in with quite a bit of water. It doesn't have to be very precise, but enough to kind of, when you come to the color, you start, it will follow where you've already got water. So it's not going to just bleed onto dry paper. It will continue to follow the places that you've already created. And so in blue, and again, you can mix this right away, but for the sake of time, I just want to kind of come in. You could probably see that I use this little tray here to kind of bring up a lot of color. I can keep adding water to that. And then just by dabbing, it's not like I'm brushing in a lot of straight lines. I just want to kind of dab my brush into the page where I've already got that base wash. And it's constantly moving the brush. I don't want to just stay still, because if I do that, then I have to keep moving, because as time moves on, I want to come back and fix things. And I'm always trying to make my sky have a kind of varied degree of colors to it. I don't want to just do one color. I want to mix, and I can always come back, add more water. And I'm going to keep that wash, make sure that my page is wet where I want to keep adding tone. And I'm this kind of dappled effect I'm trying to get. Some life to the sky rather than just a solid tone. So I start with the blue, not a real bright blue, something subtle. And this is kind of like a play off of what we learned on colored pencil last week. I don't want to overly saturate anything, because I don't, again, the coloring book analogy I always come back to. And see how I can then lift this, even if it's starting to dry, I can lift it up. And so you're not left with any real hard edges. As I come down to the buildings, I try to a little bit more tonality to it so that there's more of a contrast between what you see as building and what you see as background, that edge. You know, like I said, this is really, really strong, this contrast here. Sometimes you can use that to your advantage when you're working in watercolor because you can add tone to places, and the edge where you're changing color or changing from one tone to another can help define that perimeter. So sometimes, just keeping in mind, I'm going to make my primary facade is the one that's going to be most illuminated. The side is going to be in shadow. So I'm going to try to directionally think of sunshine coming from the upper right, and the lower left will be in the darkest. So in between color, if you want, and not always a requirement, but you can use that paper towel to kind of dry your brush, clean it. I often just, I use very little water later on during the process, so sometimes I can take out some of that watercolor, but sometimes in order to create a more of a varied sky, I can start working with that. And you can even with different colors. So if you don't like something, so I see on screen right now, it's kind of taking my yellow and amplifying it. It looks darker than I'm actually seeing it. If it's still wet, you can come back, you can dab that, almost like a giant eraser. Because if it's still wet, you'll be able to soak up a lot of that tone. Or you can come back and add more water, and that will do the same thing. You can dilute that color. And so here, like a big eraser, you can dab that. I'm adding a little bit of yellow here to give the illusion of a source of sunlight coming from the upper right. And then bringing that just a little bit, just a little tone of that entering into the space that I've created, a blue sky. All right, so then I try to do those biggest fields first. And now in this case, the water itself is very muddy and kind of brownish, maybe just straight up brown. I know that it's a relatively muddy water, but to make it appear more alive, I would try to mix. So I have my central space of my palette. You can kind of see yellow, green, and blue. In the central one, I'm going to try to mix some type of combination of browns and greens. Now I want to make sure yet again that I've got a wash on this as well. And now this is where you might want to test how much water you can utilize with the media that you've already put down. I'm using a very, very soft graphite, and you can see that it's holding up pretty well. It's not running. It's surprisingly not bleeding around very much when I put water down there. So unless you're in the tropics or the Caribbean or something, most water, especially in the upper Midwest, isn't all that blue. It's kind of, maybe sometimes on Lake Michigan, you'll have a little bit more blue, but in rivers, it's usually more of a green and gray than bright blue. So I'm trying to do a bit of a mix here. I put down a base of green and then a little bit of blue. So that greenish blue is really the tone that I want to work with. Not so much just straight up brown, which the photo kind of looks very muddy. I'm going to try to add a little bit to it to make it look a little bit more life, have a little bit more character to it. Browns and grays can really appear very dull I'm trying to brighten that up, and I can let that dry and come back to it a little bit later. So now, if I've got my sky and my water, I'm well on my way. I can start getting into the architecture now. So the one thing that I always try to do, my tones, brown and blue, create gray, a kind of cool gray. I don't want to use black like I do, you've heard me say before with colored pencil. I like that indigo blue because there's a bit more life to it. There's more color and light that can move through it. Sometimes I'm doing kind of the same thing as the indigo blue, but now I'm using paint, of course, and so I want to give this side of the building that shade, darker than most of the rest of the building. I'm not really focused on being so precise to stay in the lines. It's not what this is about. But now it's important to look at the image again and figure out where it is that I want those shadows to be cast. This is actually a deep overhang. I can make sure that I get that dark, and I'm not seeing that in the same way in the photo here. You can see that there's actually a recess right there where this, between these two units. And actually each place where there's an opening for a door, I can add some tone there too, because I believe that there is a recess. Always got to keep going back to the brush into the palette to make sure that you're achieving the tones that you want. And then here again, this is important to get. That's the big recess that I mentioned earlier. Keep adding. If you don't like the way things are going, let's say you add a few colors together and you just find the colors not the way you want it, feel free to just take your paper towel and then, try that again. Like for instance, I thought mine was looking too green. Come back and try that. I use brown as kind of like the warm gray. And if you need more cool gray, you got more blue in there. Very interesting. See how the colors work together. And you'll probably all have your own set of colors. So some of them are going to be the type that you might not use very much. I have a kind of two different yellows, a kind of yellowish orange and a kind of mustard yellow, bright red, a kind of maroon, a brown. This is a very, very deep blue, and this is more of the sky blue, two greens, and another brown here. I've never used white before. I don't even know what context that would be used in. I don't know how I would see it. Maybe if I was using a toned paper for watercolor, but I haven't even seen that before. So here too, I can start adding shadow to the sides of these trees that I know I'm going to come back to a bit later, but they're going to be in shade on the left-hand side and the bottom. So I did not mix. You can see how blue that is. I don't want to have a blue that's just so bright that it's kind of shouting at you. It's so bright. It looks fake. kind of muted tones are more realistic in this context. I don't want to draw too much attention. So I'm just going to dapple this a little bit. This is going to be, now I'm getting into more of the shadow under the base of the building. This is the part that I can't see very well. Side of the bridge also looks very dark. And also you can see the source of sun is coming from the left-hand side in this image, so you can see where the shadow is being cast here, and of course on the side that we looked at before. But I want the sun to come from another place because that helps my image. I can read it better. I think that it's playing to our advantage. So you can see that I'm actually showing the shadow coming from the opposite direction. So the underside of the bridge will always be dark, but I want to show the bridge being illuminated from the right-hand side, not the left. And so I'm going to draw my really deep shadow like this. I don't want this building to just shine as brightly as possible, so I'm just going to add some tone to that. Kind of just muted tones in shadow. Again, the left-hand side is going to be darker. It's actually, this building appears like it's curving on one face. And then it starts to become more bright as this is the source of sun is going, the source of light is coming from the right. So just, and again, if you don't like that, you can always just lighten it up again and move that water around it once again. So every time you take out some of that tone, you can move it around and then lighten it up. All right, so I'm going to clean my brush a little bit, and then I'm going to go back. I kind of jump around, as you've probably noticed. I'm not focused on one area. I'm not moving systematically like I did with my pencil from one side to another. I'm not trying to mimic all of the colors exactly. But I know that there's a very deep tone of red on this bridge, and I'm going to try to create a red that might mimic that. It's more of a maroon or a brownish red, but just enough to show. And I'm probably going out of order here because I know that there's a tree and landscape behind it, and it's often better to start with that background, but that's okay. You can always come back. So if you do this and you want to do something in the background later, you can go to the background. You might start losing some of the tone that you've set for here, but you can come back and add that later. So here's an example of mixing. I have some gray tones and I want to highlight a few of these girders that come out. You can see I can just go straight on top of it. You can make out the red. So there's my red bridge. I can always go back, and then if I want, I can do another wash down here and I can make that darker. Take out some color, but sometimes if you want to change your color tone, you have to wait for that to dry a little bit. Otherwise, you're kind of moving color around that is trying to dry. You can add more color to it once it's dried, and then you can come back to it. So if I want to go back and say, all right, I want to add something here. and the landscape in the distance. There's and I could actually go back and start doing this to all of them. Just enough color to really show that there's some tone here. You can still see through the greens. But there's a subtlety to all of this, and I certainly don't want to go in. The worst thing I can do is go in, take as much green out of here as possible, just really finding your brush to be full of that paint, and then start. I'll show you an example of this. As green can be, that green is like the no green I've seen before on a tree. It looks almost like it's so bright that it looks fake. Like, so if you do this and you see you're starting to get so much color, all you have to do is take some of that out. Just dab that with your paper towel, and then you can minimize some of that. You might just come back and maybe add a little bit of water. Always remember that the water is there to help you place color, but you can also take it away using the water. Of course, which now looks terrible, but it's part of the tools of watercolor. And always remember that there's a base to everything, and there's a shadow, and there's a highlight. And so you can draw something with lines, and you come back, you can add tone to it, take tone out. But in the end, there should be a consistency as to where that light is coming from. Always lifting my brush, moving from place to place to kind of, I don't want just a field of the same color. I want to be able to move things, move color. That's the great thing about watercolor. It creates a kind of change everywhere you look. There's a difference in tone. So even if you're just using one type of color, you can move that color in different ways, and so it's varied across the page. All right, so I'm going to add a little bit of tone to show the shadow on one side, just like I did with the building. You can see that I've already done that on some of these sides. I'm adding more darkness towards that left-hand side and the base. So it's a mix between blue and green. Underneath this is really dark. So if I come in here and I can actually add tone, another gray scale, you can see that the way that the light hits these windows, they look much darker than the very gray, but still much brighter surroundings. The windows themselves look much darker. A little bit of tone here to indicate there's a kind of recess in the building for the balcony. It looks like a step back. And then with the very lightest tone of gray, you could start to also indicate some of that gray panelization to this building. A lighter tone than the rest of the gray that you've created for the glazing, the glass. And if you forgot anything, you want to come back to it, you can always add more tone to the brush. Remember that mid-tones can be a cool gray or a warm gray. The warm gray is going to be the browns and reds. You mix in with the indigo blue, and then the very dark blues or the sky blues is going to give you much more of that cool gray. And then here, if you have to take this up another level, this was the side that we had our initial wash of gray. In order to get the shadow on this side, you can come back and start just indicating that those openings are even darker yet with this deeper tone. And there's actually an overhang here. Once you start layering these in, you can start to really show depth by shadow. This is perhaps the darkest. Okay, so then if we focus our attention to this kind of seawall, right now it looks like one giant emptiness. We haven't touched that just yet. I want to do another wash. The seawall that is of steel has a warm tone to it. And then there appears to be a concrete edge. These are wood, of course, so the wood is also going to have a kind of warm tone to it. I'm not too concerned about just staying in the lines. I just want to kind of give an idea of warmth to these elements. And depending on how much time you have or how much you want to spend on it, you could continuously add more tone. So like for instance, there's a shadow that's created between each of these. You could do a mix between some of the warm and then add a little bit of blue in there to really give you a darker version of that same color that you can take down into this space between. That's kind of the recesses of the seawall. They're like interlocking channels. I'm going to try to transition again. I see that I could add a little bit of more kind of red tone to this part of the bridge. Okay. Come back and even start adding some of that reflectivity to the water, pulling down some of the tone that you've created that meets the water, and some always make sure that you aren't making more severe colors as you come into the water. You're kind of mellowing that color down because it's mixing with the water itself, so it shouldn't be quite as vibrant as the color is above the water. Always looking at where we can add shadow to create that contrast. So under the bridge, I did it a little bit with my pencil lines, but I can come back and add a little bit more. And then usually where the water hits the edge, we have a darker tone as well. And then I'm going to do a wash here as well. This is the concrete that I see. It appears to be a kind of warm concrete in the distance. And then it kind of changes. This water, this edge is like moving from poured concrete to the seawall to another type of concrete that might have a little bit of landscaping to maybe a metal panel with railing above it to another concrete abutment. It's just all sorts of different things happening along this wall. But I don't really want to spend time, detailing exactly what kind of wall. It's not the focus of the drawing. But if I do want to get a little bit more contrast in some of these ideas of these logs are three-dimensional, they have a side that's getting more light than the other side, so I can come back and add a little bit of tone. So this is really a kind of place where I think actually did I watercolor and mixed media. So it's already mixed media because I've already started working with graphite. So this drawing is already mixed media. And I don't want to take much more than this. This is the place where now, if I continue to go with watercolor here, of course you can do that, but I like to kind of step back and take a look at what I've got relative to the image. So you can see the saturation of the photo, very dark tones in shadow here and a very, very solid, muddy kind of water. And I've brightened that up a bit. I can go back now, once I've dried, once this kind of sets a little bit more, I can go back and work with some more tone, or I could start working with pen, or again with graphite to crispen some of those edges up if I want. And I could even, for instance, come back with graphite and say, maybe I don't like the way this tree is defined right now. It looks kind of, I can see through it, but not really. And it just isn't really looking like an object that's coming out. It's not really jumping off the page. So I can actually go back with graphite or with your colored pencil and start adding more tonality to this so that you could do this with colored pencil as well. But I like the idea of mixed media. You work with the tools that you're comfortable with. And so for this exercise, I would like everyone to explore the possibilities that you have with watercolor, but then come back and see what you can do to improve upon them. So, it might be using the tool that you're comfortable with is graphite. You can do that, of course. Or maybe ink is more preferable, or colored pencil. And so it's really up to you. I encourage you to utilize the tools that you are comfortable with, but also utilizing things like the new tools like this, in this case, would be watercolor. So the one thing that might not be quite as simple to figure out is the thin line and the precision that you get with pencil is not the kind of thing that you normally find with watercolor. It's more gestural, it's more large strokes. And so by coming back and adding more to this a bit later, you can see that you can add quite a bit of detail to it if you find that you would like to do that. All right, so I'm going to work a little bit more on this, but I hope this has been helpful. First, of course, working in perspective, and then moving back into different media to come up with something your own. And yeah, I think that's as far as I want to take it for the video. So thank you for joining, and we will be meeting on Friday, and we will in class be working on another watercolor, so make sure that you bring your supplies. I will post this to Canvas, and so you'll have a week to work on this, and we will see you in class on Friday. Okay, thank you, everyone.